Have you ever reached a point in your life where you were giving everything you had to someone, pouring your energy, your love, and your patience into them, only to feel like they were quietly pulling away? It is one of the most exhausting and discouraging places a person can find themselves in. You invest time, you show up consistently, you carry the weight of the connection when they begin slipping through the cracks, and still, it feels as though every effort you make only widens the distance. In that place, frustration takes root, not because you lack strength, but because you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is measured in how hard you try. And so, you push harder, chase more deliberately, convince yourself that if you just prove your commitment enough times, eventually she will see. But here's the truth that can change everything. The real breakthrough doesn't come when you prove harder, chase faster, or try to convince her with every ounce of yourself. The breakthrough comes in the moment you stop needing to chase. The shift happens when there is no more desperation, when there is no longer hunger for someone else's approval, when you finally discover that your peace is far more valuable than her validation. Ironically, that is often the moment the very person you tried so hard to hold on to begins to notice you again. That's often when she begins to inch back, not because of some cheap game or reverse psychology, but because you've finally turned the corner into strength. You no longer need her. And that absence of need is magnetic in a way that words cannot describe. It feels almost unfair at first glance. You spent months, maybe years, trying to prove yourself, carrying a weary heart and showing up repeatedly despite being overlooked, underappreciated, or even dismissed. The old you was predictable. The old you was always accessible. The old you was quick to forgive, quick to extend another chance, quick to sacrifice your own dignity for the sake of keeping her comfortable. And she may not have admitted it, but somewhere deep down, she counted on that predictability. She knew if she distanced herself, eventually you'd fold. You check in after a few days, break the silence even when she was the one who created it, apologize for things that weren't your fault simply because you hated the tension. That gave her a sense of control. It lulled her into the belief that she could withdraw as much as, but then something changed. Something inside of you shifted. You stopped showing up the same way. You stopped handing out apologies like candy just to soothe the discomfort she created. You stopped treating reconciliation like it was your duty, even when you weren't the one undoing the bond. And that shift was not born out of spite. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't revenge. It was something purer, stronger, and infinitely more important. You finally discovered your own peace, and once you tasted it, you refused to barter it away for scraps of inconsistent attention. Like a Stoic, your gaze turned inward. Not to hide, not to wall off the world, but to reclaim your center. The silence that once meant vulnerability is now your power. What once felt like absence has become your anchor. She didn't expect that. She never anticipated the version of you who doesn't flinch when she acts distant, who doesn't bleed energy at the altar of her indecision, who doesn't return simply because she withdrew. Suddenly she is standing face to face not with the man she could always count on to come back, but with a man whose silence is louder and more unsettling than any argument could ever be. That silence is not empty. It is full of self-respect. It is brimming with discipline. It radiates the calm of a man who has outgrown the need to beg for clarity he should have been given freely. She may not realize it immediately, but the reason her stomach begins to twist in the stillness is because she's coming to terms with something she never wanted to face. She is losing access to you. Not because you vanished, but because you rose. Your absence isn't hollow. It's full of weight. At first, she might brush it off. She tells herself, oh, he'll check in again. He's just tired right now. The silence is temporary. But when hours become days, and days fill weeks, and she still hasn't heard that familiar ping, still hasn't seen the message that reassures her of her power, something inside of her begins to unravel. That absence, which she once assumed was fleeting, starts pressing on her chest like gravity she can't escape. It finally dawns on her, this silence is not a pause. It is a boundary. And more profoundly, your absence starts to represent something bigger than space between you. It announces that you are no longer emotionally available in the ways you once were. Not mentally bound, not spiritually tethered to her moods or whims. She remembers the man who filled every silence with effort, who rushed to patch cracks the moment they appeared. But that man is no longer here. He has been replaced by someone who no longer negotiates his dignity. Someone who moves with quiet purpose, who has replaced apology with clarity, and who carries himself with the strength of a mountain unmoved by storms. This change is not loud. You haven't screamed, you haven't staged some grand performance to get her attention. Instead, your dignity now speaks louder than any speech could. Like Seneca said, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. But in your case, the courage is in letting go calmly, without bitterness, without resentment. The courage is in walking away from the endless cycle of apologies and negotiations and choosing the difficult but liberating act of peace. That peace doesn't come from her answers. It doesn't come from her closure. It doesn't come from her recognition. It comes from you deciding that your soul matters too much to keep bleeding for someone who couldn't value it when it was freely given. And that's when everything begins to flip. You may not even notice it right away, but something about your stillness unsettles her. Without realizing it, you've pulled away the safety net she believed she had, the emotional anchor she thought she could always return to. Now she finds herself tangled in her own silence, replaying the moments when she dismissed your presence, re-examining the comfort she once assumed was permanent, and waking up to the fact that it's gone. That's when your absence becomes heavier than your presence ever was. But here's the deeper truth, the real beauty of this transformation is not what it does to her. It's not about provoking regret or playing some elaborate reverse psychology trick. The true beauty is what it reveals in you. Because in shedding the old version of yourself, you finally see what you should have carried all along. Your peace is not negotiable. Your energy is not an offering that should be thrown at someone's feet in desperation. Your silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is strength forged in the fire of disappointment. It is clarity revealed in the stillness where once there was only frantic pursuit. You break cycles not by shouting about them, but by becoming still within them. You grow not by demanding others to value you, but by choosing to value yourself enough to walk away from what corrodes your worth. You embody discipline by no longer being baited into reactions, by no longer looping through the same emotional traps, by no longer explaining yourself to someone who only ever listened with half an ear. You are no longer chasing what refuses to be caught. You are no longer losing yourself to prove that you're enough. Instead, you have realized that you were enough all along, but that truth only shines once you stop begging others to confirm it. And ironically, that is almost always the place where she starts to turn her head. When the control she had begins to slip. When the buttons she could push no longer work. When the coldness she used to send no longer makes you chase warmth. She begins to face what she never expected, the power she once had over you is gone. That's when the story twists. When you stop reacting in predictable ways, when you break the patterns that once kept you trapped, an entirely new version of you is born. And that birth unsettles the world around you. You see, when people think they understand you, when they believe they can pull one string and watch you dance, they grow comfortable with the illusion of control. And when you take that control back, when you stop playing the role they've always counted on, suddenly you become a mystery. A man of mystery is unsettling, and unsettled people reveal truths about themselves they cannot conceal. You've lived that difference. You used to be the man fueled by the fear of losing her, terrified of silence, quick to patch up cracks even if you were bleeding out your own worth just to hold her close. Fear drove you to try harder than anyone else would. Fear made you consistent in a way she never had to be. But fear is a prison, and sooner or later, you had to walk free. When you no longer reacted to every hesitation, every pullback, every sparkless moment she gave you, it created a new rhythm, a rhythm of calm. She did not expect to meet this man. She expected the forgiver, the apologizer, the dreamer who believed love alone was enough to mend disrespect and inconsistency. Instead, she is confronted with a man who embodies boundaries. A man who understands that real strength is not shown in clinging, but in letting go. A man who realizes that silence can heal wounds words only deepen. Every text you did not send spoke louder than any novel could. Every phone call you refused to make echoed in her mind louder than arguments and pleas. Every ounce of dignity you collected back for yourself felt like thunder rolling through her silence. She might not admit it, and she might cover it with distractions, with smiles, with bravado, but the truth is simple. For the first time, she feels the absence of a man who used to orbit his world around her. And your absence is not careless. It is precise. You are not punishing. You are protecting. You are not removing your energy to prove a point, you are preserving it to rebuild yourself. To her, it feels like confusion. To you, it feels like clarity. That is the power of transformation. When you rise in discipline, someone else's confusion only reveals how much they took you for granted. Think back for a moment. How many times did you extend patience until it bent into pain? How many apologies did you give that were not even yours to issue? How many nights did you lose to overthinking, to replaying conversations, to rewriting messages in drafts you never wanted to send but felt compelled to? That was the energy of a man chained to a hope someone else never nurtured. But now, that energy has been redirected. It fuels your vision, your growth, your body, your mind, your purpose. The hours that once disappeared in worry now forge you in strength. That change does not need to be explained. It does not require a speech. Growth announces itself quietly, but it cannot be ignored. It drips from your silence, it radiates from your body language, it drives your decisions. Stillness is no longer weakness, it's your compass, pointing you away from confusion and toward clarity. A Stoic man needs no vindication from others, he finds his worth in his own discipline. And discipline is magnetic. Not because it plays games, but because it cannot be manufactured. That is what begins to pull her back. Not your smiling face. Not your desperate pursuit. Not the words you once used to reassure her. It is your detachment. Your emotional independence. Your refusal to need anything she offers. That power draws her not because you sought it, but because it is unavailable to most men she encounters. Understand this, when control slips through her fingers, when she sends hints or subtle provocations and receives nothing but your stillness, her world shifts. For so long, she held the picture of you, reactionary, patient, endlessly forgiving, like a weapon she could brandish to ensure you stayed in her orbit. And now, when she lifts it, she finds only silence. The silence does not argue. It does not fight. It simply resounds with the truth, you've grown into a man who cannot be baited. At first, she won't know what to do with that silence. She may dismiss it, laugh about it, tell herself it doesn't matter. But cracks form when someone begins realizing they have lost access they thought eternal. She thought her absence could call you to action. But instead, your action was to embrace the peace she could never offer. That peace disrupts her. Because when women meet a man unavailable to emotional manipulation, they see something rare, something almost uncontainable, a man who embodies freedom. And freedom is the most dangerous attraction of all. Not because it seeks to seduce, but because it cannot be controlled. And here's the truth you now embody, the man who once begged for closure no longer needs it. The man who once needed her to validate his worth now validates himself. The man who once thought survival meant clinging has learned survival is letting go. That is why, in the end, she almost always returns. When time passes and absence grows heavy, when your energy has ascended beyond reach, when she sees nostalgia rewriting herself as the villain in a story she once thought she dominated, she circles back, testing the waters to see if the old you still exists. She'll send breadcrumbs, half-efforts, little signs just to confirm whether you're still waiting in the shadows. But you're not. Because this version of you doesn't chase crumbs. You no longer analyze every syllable of her texts as though they matter more than your peace. You have grown past the addiction of needing external reassurance. You aren't warmed by fleeting gestures, you are lit by the fire within. And so, if she comes with nostalgia painted on her words, with memories polished by the distance of time, with eyes that remember the man who once bent endlessly, she will find not a boy seeking her approval, but a man anchored in his own purpose. She will try the doors that once opened so easily, only to find them locked, not behind anger, but behind standards. That is the paradox you embody now. She will return when you no longer want her. Not because your silence is a strategy, but because it is a declaration. You no longer barter peace for the illusion of affection. You no longer confuse activity with love or half measures with commitment. Instead, you ask better questions. Does this align with my vision? Does this respect my boundaries? Does this enhance my purpose? And if the answer is no, you let go with dignity. And in that letting go, you discover a truth few ever realize: you have always been enough. Her approval, her presence, her validation, none of it adds anything essential to who you are. Peace was always inside you, waiting for you to stop chasing storms. Strength was always available, waiting for you to stop clinging to weakness disguised as loyalty. Now the world sees it. She sees it. But most importantly, you see it. This is why the path forward feels different. Your silence is not emptiness, it is packed with power. Your absence is not loss, it is protection. Your standards are not ego, they are evidence of self-mastery. The man you have become is no longer chained to her decisions. He is defined by his own. And once a man stands firmly in that place, no return, no apology, no tears can undo him. Because the truth is, you didn't lose her. She lost access to the man you no longer are. There comes a point where the stillness you've embraced begins to settle into your bones. At first, it might have felt uncomfortable. Silence had always been foreign to you because you were used to filling every gap with effort, with explanations, with the desperate hope that one more text or one more attempt could keep something alive. But now that same silence is no longer an abyss, it is sanctuary. Instead of tormenting you with unasked questions, it grounds you with eternal answers. You no longer wonder whether she's thinking of you, whether she'll come back, whether you did enough. Because you know, you did far more than enough. And in knowing, you finally rest. That rest is foreign to her. She still believes silence should feel suffocating, that silence is a void that needs to be filled. But for you, silence has become a teacher. It has taught you that peace is not given, it is chosen. It has shown you that dignity does not demand attention, it grows quietly, like roots beneath the soil, deepening as storms pass above. And when your silence speaks for you, it echoes with a truth she can no longer escape: you've risen above the old cycle. You've left behind the version of you that built homes in her uncertainty. Your presence now carries weight. Not because you are louder, but because you are calmer. Not because you explain more, but because you explain nothing at all. The absence of explanations terrifies her far more than arguments once did. Because your silence removes a script she once knew by heart. She can no longer depend on your apologies, your reassurances, your willingness to bleed yourself dry just to prove that love was real. Instead, she is confronted with an unsettling reality: you are loving yourself more than you ever loved her. And that shift is the most radical transformation she has ever seen. She remembers the past differently now. Memories come in fragments, your voice checking in after she ignored you, your arms opening even when she pulled away, your forgiveness extended with a heart still aching. At the time, those things felt trivial to her, almost guaranteed. But the absence of those gestures now rewrites her entire perception. In their absence, she begins to see the weight they carried, the generosity they represented, the rarity of a man willing to give without keeping score. And more profoundly, she realizes they were not infinite. They were not her entitlement. They were your choices, gifts you no longer give. But let's pause here: the true transformation was never meant to make her realize. The true transformation was to make you realize. You see, your stillness isn't a weapon. Your growth isn't a tactic. This is not about revenge, or punishment, or trying to manipulate her into regret. This is about choosing yourself in a way you once avoided. The truth is, you were afraid. You feared walking away because it meant letting go of the possibility, the image, the fantasy. You feared being alone, so you tolerated being misunderstood. You feared losing her, so you lost yourself in pieces. But the fire of disappointment forged something stronger. You sat in your pain long enough to feel where it cut you deepest. And then, instead of covering those wounds with distraction, you treated them with reflection. You learned patience with yourself. You discovered self-respect not as an idea, but as a practice. And now, the man who emerges is not held together by desperation, but by principles. He has rebuilt his structure from the inside out. That is why your silence shakes her. Because what you carry now cannot be undone. No apology can unforge steel. No tearful return can soften stone into the clay it once was. Because you've already become tempered by fire. You didn't just survive the loss, you were shaped by it into something greater. That's why, even if she returns, it will never feel the same for you again. Not because you are bitter, but because you've seen the cost of living without boundaries, and you will never pay that toll again. Think of it this way, the man who once stayed awake replaying her cold words has now learned to sleep peacefully, not because answers were given, but because he gave himself permission to stop asking. The man who once checked his phone endlessly for her reply now puts his phone down because his mind is focused on building something bigger, his health, his mind, his calling. The man who once tried to bend himself into someone else's approval now stands unbent, unshaken, unmoved, not by arrogance, but by understanding. That is what self-respect looks like. And while she may find it intimidating, you find it liberating. And liberation has no price tag. You don't wait for closure anymore, you became closure. You don't wait for her return to validate you, you validate yourself daily in the way you live. You don't dream of her reappearance as salvation because you already saved yourself from the endless game of giving too much. The irony, of course, is that a man in this place, calm, centered, unafraid of letting go, is often the very man she longs for. And yet, by the time she comes back, you've outgrown the need for her presence. Understand this clearly, growth always makes you outgrow someone. Whether or not she returns, you've moved to levels where her validation has no currency. You see life differently now. You wake up with standards that no longer bend to memory. You interact with others not from fear, but from clarity. You live by choice, not by compulsion. And those standards illuminate everything, friendships, relationships, commitments. You've realized that not everyone earns the intimacy they once exploited, and now you guard yourself not with bitterness, but with wisdom. It does something fascinating inside you. You no longer check her absence like an open wound, you honor it like a healed scar. A scar is proof that pain visited, but healing remained. Your scar does not shame you, it reminds you of resilience. And every time she remembers you, every time she hovers back in with nostalgia, every time she tests those waters, your scar reminds you that you are no longer the same man. The lesson has already been learned. The story has already been closed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Before, you were consumed with trying to control outside events, her moods, her distance, her silence. But now, you've redirected everything inward, and there lies your strength. Your life isn't shaped by her choices anymore. It's shaped by your discipline, your thoughts, your non-negotiables. She will feel that loss deeply. Because she once had access to a man who poured generously without balance. Now she meets a man who pours selectively, carefully, and only where there is reciprocation. It's like losing water in the desert, you don't appreciate it until it's gone, and once it's gone, thirst follows relentlessly. But as harsh as that sounds, your focus is never on making her regret. A true Stoic doesn't seek revenge. He only seeks mastery. Your silence is not meant to wound her, it is simply meant to protect you. In protecting you, it naturally forces her to face the truths she kept postponing. And that is why silence is more powerful than argument. Arguments beg the other person to understand you. Silence proves you have understood yourself. This is where your journey now stands. Not at the edge of waiting, not lost in the spiral of what-ifs, but anchored in a truth that has freed countless men: you are complete without her. You were always complete, but now you finally believe it. You were always enough, but now you finally embody it. You were always capable of peace, but now you finally protect it. And with that knowledge, every interaction, every temptation to look back, every hint she throws, becomes irrelevant. Because not even her return can outshine the brilliance of the man you became without her. There is something undeniable about the man who no longer waits. His presence alters everything, not by force but by simple gravity. You once poured your worth into proving yourself to someone else, chasing approval as though it were oxygen, convinced that without it you could not breathe. But now you know the truth: you were never drowning from a lack of her love. You were drowning from a lack of your own. And the moment you decided to reclaim yourself, the current that once dragged you beneath the surface transformed into the stillness of calm waters. Every day that passes without you bending, without you folding into the old familiar weakness, plants your roots deeper. And those roots begin to feed you with what you needed all along: self-respect, patience, and courage. You are no longer swayed by whether she misses you, whether her words come back softened by regret, whether her voice trembles with a late confession. Those things that once haunted you now feel almost irrelevant. Because you no longer live in the in-between, you live in clarity. And clarity is freedom. This kind of strength is not loud, not boastful, not eager to prove itself. It is quiet, like the calm of a mountain at dawn. It doesn't announce, but it is undeniable. It isn't reactive, because true strength does not flinch when tested. Instead, it lets tests pass by like storms that can shake the branches, but never uproot the tree. That is the man you've become. And whether she realizes it or not, the moment she stands before you again, she will feel it in her bones: the shift, the completeness, the finality of it all. But the greatest victory here is not in how she sees you, it's in how you finally see yourself. For perhaps the first time in years, you no longer measure your worth in someone else's recognition. You no longer grade your heart on how much or how little it was accepted. You know now that acceptance of another person does not matter if it requires the rejection of yourself. And you refuse to reject yourself again. You carry your worth as a man who discovered it in a fire, and that worth is no longer up for debate. The irony she can never predict is that now her presence feels different to you. Once, her voice was the center of your universe. If she called, everything stopped. If she pulled back, your chest caved with panic. If she criticized, you begged for forgiveness. But now, while you still recognize that part of your heart once cared deeply, it is impossible for you to re-enter that prison willingly. You cannot unknow your own value. You cannot unlearn your own strength. And you cannot return to the place where you betrayed your peace just to hold on to what was never steady. This is what freedom looks like. The chains are gone. You can smile again, not the forced smile of someone wondering if he is enough, but the natural smile of someone who knows he is whole regardless of the company he keeps. That is the rarest thing in the world. Because most men live entire lives chasing crumbs to avoid facing themselves. They run from silence because silence reveals their lack of peace. But you faced it head-on, and what you found in the silence wasn't weakness, it was power. Now, the silence that once felt unbearable to you has become unbearable to her. Because when she finally looks around and sees her digital breadcrumbs unanswered, her casual tests ignored, her nostalgia unreciprocated, she realizes the old dynamic has dissolved. What she used to do to measure your attachment no longer gives her results. And that unsettles her because power once assumed is now gone. Nothing creates more regret than realizing what you assumed would always be there has vanished. But this regret is not your responsibility anymore. You are not here to fix her realization, and you are not here to soften the consequences that your silence mirrors back to her. You simply allow life to do what life always does, teach through absence what presence never seemed to accomplish. Because sometimes people only start to see the beauty of something not when it's offered but when it's removed. And your presence, once offered so freely, is gone. And here is where the game of life flips. When she finally returns, it will no longer mean the same to you. Not because you hate her, but because you've built yourself in ways that make her return irrelevant. You've filled your days with new roots of growth. You've fed your body with discipline, not despair. You've sharpened your mind with wisdom, not excuses. You've cultivated habits that no longer orbit her, but orbit your purpose. So when her message appears, it feels light, almost weightless, where once it would have felt monumental. And that is the clearest sign you've become something different. You are unmoved. That's what makes the new you dangerous, not in anger but in presence. You are no longer available in the ways you once were, because your peace is sacred now, and sacred things are not easily given. Your attention is not offered like the open-door free access it once was. Instead, it has become deliberate, careful, intentional, as it always should have been. And when she realizes she no longer has that endless access, she will feel the loss with a depth she cannot fully articulate. But even then, you will not gloat. You will not smirk with revenge or laugh at her pain. Because that isn't who you are. You are not hardened by bitterness, you are built by wisdom. And wisdom does not need revenge, it only requires clarity. Wisdom tells you that even if her tears fall, it doesn't mean you must embrace her again. Wisdom shows you that even if she whispers nostalgia, it doesn't make today any less powerful. Wisdom demonstrates that peace requires boundaries, even with those you once loved. And in this, you discover what so many never do: the return of someone who once broke you is not the end goal. The true triumph is realizing you do not need them anymore. That's when the transformation is complete. That's when you stand as the man you were always meant to be, tethered not to her choices but to your principles. Anchored not in her attention but in your own self-regard. You no longer look behind you with longing. You look ahead with clarity. And nothing is more attractive, more magnetic, more unshakable than a man who walks forward with peace, even if it means walking alone.